Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this pleasant evening at the Embassy of Mexico, where we will be involved in a very interesting journey to Mexico and Japan through the amazing literary creation of the Mexican author Antolina Ortiz Moore, Azul Humo, who has just came back from her tour in Mexico. It is an honor to have the presence of Ambassador of Japan, His Excellency Kanji Yamanouchi, as our guest of honor. To begin with, I would like to invite Ambassador of Mexico, His Excellency Carlos Joaquín González, to make some introductory remarks.
Dear guests, distinguished colleagues, dear friends, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you this evening to the launch of the novel Azul Humo, authored by the talented writer Antolina Ortiz. Welcome.
Thank
you. This event not only celebrates the release of an exceptional book, but also highlights the deep cultural ties that unite Mexico, Japan, and Canada. Three nations that, despite their geographic distances, share rich histories of migration, artistic exchange, and mutual influence. I would like to extend a very special thank you to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Japan in Canada, Mr. Kanji Yamanouchi, for joining us today. Welcome. Your presence is a testament to the friendship and collaboration that exists between our nations and reflects your commitment to fostering cultural exchanges and an appreciation of the arts. Mexico and Japan share a long history of friendship and cooperation. Formal diplomatic relations were established in 1888, but our exchanges go back even further, to the maritime expeditions of the 16th century. Today, Japan is the second largest source of foreign direct investment in Mexico. And in 2024, Mexican tourism to Japan reached a record number of 151,000 visitors. This ongoing exchange highlights the strength of our bilateral relationship, which extends beyond diplomacy into culture, literature, and the arts. However, it is important to also recognize the role of Canada as a bridge between these two cultures. Canada has been home to vibrant Japanese and Mexican communities for decades, creating a space where traditions, perspectives, and artistic expressions merge. This multicultural environment enriches literary voices, such as Antolina's, who, through her own experience living in Montreal, has developed a unique storytelling perspective that blends elements of all three cultures.
5:41 p.m.
The book we are presenting today, Azul Humo, is a perfect example of this intersection of identities. Through the masterful storytelling of Antolina Ortiz, we are transported to different historical and geographical contexts, witnessing the intertwined destinies of three characters. One of them, Aiko, embarks on a journey to Mexico in search of his father, a successful gardener during the Porfirian period. The novel also takes us to Kyoto during World War II, revealing the resilience and emotional depth of a mother navigating the challenges of wartime Japan. This narrative reminds us how migration, memory, and cultural heritage shape who we are, no matter where we come from. Antolina's literary talent has been widely recognized. Her commitment to literature is matched by her keen interest in environmental protection, a theme solely woven into her work. Joining us today in this dialogue is Dr. Ángel Mota, a distinguished scholar who holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Montreal. He's a literary curator for the Latin Arte Foundation and has published poems and short stories in Canada, Spain, the US, Mexico, Italy, France, and Chile. His insight will enrich our discussion of Azul Humo and its exploration of migration, identity, and cultural belonging. Both Antolina and Ángel are currently working on the second anthology of Mexican-Canadian authors, reinforcing the literary and cultural ties between our nations. Tonight, as we celebrate Antolina's literary achievements, we also recognize the importance of amplifying women's voice in all spheres, including literature, diplomacy, and society as a whole. This aligns with Mexico's feminist foreign policy and our first ever female president's commitment to bringing women to the forefront of our government's action. The presence of all of you here today is a testament to the power of literature in transcending borders and uniting cultures. The story of Azul Humo invites us to reflect on the human connections that go beyond national identities, showing us that in the end, migration, resilience, and cultural fusion are universal experiences. I invite you to immerse yourselves in the pages of Azul Humo and discover the stories that connect and enrich us as humanity. Thank you very much for joining us in this celebration of literature and the enduring friendship between Mexico, Japan, and Canada. Thank you.
Well, I also want to acknowledge the presence here of Gerardo Familiar from UNAM Canada, and it's worth to mention that this event is part of the activities organized by the Embassy of Mexico and UNAM Canada to promote gender equality in the framework of International Women's Day. And following, I would like to invite Ambassador of Japan, His Excellency Kanji Yamanouchi, to make some important remarks.
Buenos tardes. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. So honored. And Ambassador Carlos Manuel Joaquín González. Thank you very much. And also Antolina Ortiz Moore.
Thank you.
Such a famous author from Mexico and in Canada. And this is about a friendship among three countries. I'm so honored to be here. And so I look back the history. Actually, Mexico and Japan have a friendship over 400 years. You may not believe it, but I'll tell you the story. It was 1609. At that time, a Spanish Empire had enormous the land there, and the Philippines and Mexico, and of course European countries. Then between Manila and Acapulco, there was a huge trade route by navigation. And on someday, on 1909, the ship unfortunately was wrecked. The people were thrown into the ocean. The villagers of the Japanese fisher village helped them, saved them. So the Don Rodrigo was a governor of the Philippines and also the high-ranking officials of the Mexico. And he met with the high-ranking officials of the shogun in 1609. more than 400 years ago. That was the first encounter, official encounter between Mexico and Japan. And after that, Shogun took the isolation policy. So no exchange with foreign countries whatsoever. So that was a very, very significant moment in 1609, early 17th century. Then after 300 years ago, 300 later, so Japan becoming the modern nation. So it was 1888. That was the year of the official treaty between the modern Japan and independent country Mexico. The amazing thing is, this treaty was the first ever treaty which is equal treatment with Japan. Because Japan started to engage with the European powers in the middle of the 19th century, and all those treaties was unequal. So the European power treated Japan in a very inferior sort of positions in terms of the legalistic manner. So the then Japanese government was working so hard to rectify those inequality, to elevate to the equal treaty. Our treaty with Mexico was the first equal treaty. So it was very symbolic for our modernization. It was very inspiring. So before and after the isolation policies, Mexico played a key role for the Japanese society and the Japanese foreign policy. So today, we're very happy to see the relations between Mexico and Japan. We are both members of the TPP. We are both members of the G20. We are both members of APEC and OECD. We'll be working together so much. And Carlos-san, you just mentioned the number of the Mexican travelers to Japan. But we have so many Japanese companies investing in Mexico. But at the same time, we are facing a very difficult time. You may know it. But I would like to add this literature. It's far away from politics, businesses, but literature also plays a very important role. I confess, I don't read Spanish. I only know Hasta Mañana, Muchas Gracias. But thanks to the machine translation, I read the summary of this blue smoke. Then I was very much struck by the atmosphere of the stories and the title. I remember two Japanese authors, two Murakamis.
Yes.
So you say blue smoke. Then blue is to me almost a transparent blue, written by Murakami Ryu. By the way, he's from my hometown. He's much elder than me. But yeah, that one. The other one is Haruki Murakami. He wrote a book about the Kafka on the shore. Also, their story to seeking himself and family heritage and others. And the impression of your story, so much freedom. The story goes anywhere in the time and space freely, and creating the certain sort of feelings, the belongings, and myself, discovery, and recreation of the things. That's very, very inspiring. And I was so impressed. One of the main characters, Aiko, from Kyoto, right? The journey from Kyoto to Mexico and crossing the Pacific Ocean. And it's an amazing story, and this is very symbolic for the partnership and friendship between Mexico, Japan, and Canada. And I do understand you are born in Mexico. Now you live in Montreal. So this is very much Canadian, diversity, freedom, and inclusiveness. So I think this is a very, very significant hope for us. We, the diplomats, working for the betterment of the world. But just like Aiko in the story, she comes across ups and downs. But holding the hopes and strength and to overcome those ups and downs. And finally, she discovered herself and sort of bonds with fathers and families. And so this, what can I say, journey is something like our diplomats. So we try to overcome those ups and downs and difficulties today. We hope, we have strong hope for the better world for tomorrow. But so finally, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to meet with you, to hear your story. So once again, muchas gracias. I really looking forward to your story. Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。
Thank you, Ambassador. And well, I would like to invite now the writers Antolina Ortiz Moore and Ángel Mota to come to the front. And before we begin this meaningful dialogue, I would like to invite both ambassadors to take a picture with them because unfortunately, Ambassador of Japan has to leave because he has another commitment, but not before having a memorable picture with both authors. Please, Ambassador.
Yes. And I have a little gift for you. It's the book. You have to learn to read in Spanish.
Okay, yes, I will do that. Arigato, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Very much.
Nos ponemos. Okay.
One more here, please. I will go that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Arigato.
Hello.
Pagado.
Hello. Can everybody hear me now?
Mhm.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure for me to talk about Antolina, which is not only a great author, but it's a wonderful person, a dear friend of mine. So if you want, we're just gonna jump in because we have a lot to talk about and we have not so much time because we also want to hear you all your questions. When I'm sure you're going to be very interested. Antolina, you have, I will say, a bright career as a writer, but I will say it all started when I met you with one book here, Otumba, in Canada. You start publishing in Mexico a few books that have quite a bit of success, but in Canada with this book, she started to be known. He was published in Ottawa, by the way. And in this book, with all those who love literature, she had a lot of influence of Juan Rulfo. Rulfo, our prominent writer, maybe the best in Mexico, by their writing, very synthetic, very poetical at the same time. There is a lot of melancholia and sadness. But we already see in this book one of the main topics that Antolina explores, and that is the one of the inner self. How do we find ourselves? How do we find ourselves in between the tempest in the wars of times? I think that's a key thing to remember. And then she came out with a wonderful book called Araña in Spanish, which is this book that earned the Nadal Prize, Romulo Gallegos, and the novel of the best female novel in Mexico national level. And these books, which I highly recommend you read it, she represents and writes her best. What do I mean by that? I think is when Antolina, her inner voice, what she writes about, all her worries, everything, her talent, really comes out in this novel. And why? Because there are aspects that we find in Humo Azul, or Azul Humo, right? That started here. And that is, she likes to be synthetic. She likes to go to the point. She likes to explore poetry. And she likes to travel the world to dreams, to the fantastic. And she likes to do it fast, but she likes to do it precise with science. And she also likes to show all of us our soul, our imaginary, to make it, you can touch it, you can smell it, you can see it. and that is telaraña. But now we're going to talk about Azul Humo, which is exactly what it is. Azul Humo would earn an award also in Poniatowska, which is a very important prize. Jose Camilo Cela in Spain too, which you couldn't accept, but is what earned it. This novel, we're talking about exploration, the migration of Japanese in Mexico. But I want to point out the fact that it's a book made of memories of people that went to Mexico. Japanese migrants went to Mexico and they tell about their story there. But it's also the story about the postman that steals letter in France. And we try to recreate the history through letters, through remembering, to what people feel. And the way of recreating these fragments of history, which can be very painful, is through flowers. One of the most powerful images when I read it was when this Japanese migrant came to Mexico, and the smell of chile, the smell of food, and then looking at the flowers. So I think we have to look into the details, and I think it's very important, the details, how you work those details out, because that's what makes the novel, not the general story. So the question is then, when those details of memory and Azul Humo, the blue color, why Azul Humo?
Yes, this is one of the important aspects of the novel. There are many little things that we will find in the novel, but the color, the blue, every chapter has a different tone of blue. That will be the title of each tone. The thing is, I had to describe the tree, jacaranda tree, which is the tree that Matsumoto brought to Mexico from Brazil. And so when I found this out, I was doing research. And I think many of us read this article written by Sergio Hernández Galindo. He's a very important historian of the Nikkei that came to Mexico. And one of them, Matsumoto, brought the jacaranda, which is one of the iconic trees in our country. And I could not believe it. You know, I've seen these trees since I was a little girl, and I did not know that Japan had brought them to Mexico from Brazil. And I've always felt that I'm a citizen of the world, and seeing these symbols is very important for me, like for ambassadors. No? I think it's very important to realize that we're all together, and not only as people, but as nature. And nature has traveled everywhere. We've been humans as we know ourselves for so many years, and we're made up of migration. That's basically who we are. And so I had to describe the tree. I have to ask my forgiveness to Ángel because my mind is always traveling in every direction. So he asks a question and I always answer whatever. You know?
That's okay. We're here to hear you.
But the reason that the chapters are all blue is because I had to describe this amazing tree and I had to use many colors of blue. If you look at the description of blue in the internet, there are hundreds of tones or dozens of tones maybe of color blue. So each chapter is a different color, and it was to make a puzzle of the colors blue to become actual things that happen and that had sense. That is one thing. I also just read recently an article in the New York Times, which is amazing, and it talks about how the color blue is so important for artists. So music and literature and sculpture and painting, all kinds of art. And blue is up there in one of our favorite tones.
And actually the book is structured, every single chapter is a color, right? And in the color, I think it's a mood, it's a shape, it's something that is happening. So it goes to the feelings, not the five senses, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, completely. Yeah.
So say that, what is the link between jacarandas and the history of Mexico? Because through the novel, we go to a very important part of the history of Mexico for those who are want to read it. I don't want to spoil it, but you're going to read about an important part of Mexico, which is under the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz in the 19th century, end of the 19th century, and it goes up to the Second World War. So can you tell us about this link?
Yes, I'm not an expert on migration of Japan to Mexico, but I did do a lot of research with Sergio Hernández Galindo. We were actually emailing each other during the pandemic, and he sent me his book, and it's extremely interesting. He talks about all these migrations, and I was not aware of, and I think most people were not aware of how important the migration to Japan was in Mexico for our culture. We even have a kind of a, food that we eat, the cacahuates japoneses, that all of us, every single Mexican will know about. And these are peanuts that are covered, and we've all eaten them, we know. I did not know they came actually from Japan, even though they're called cacahuates japoneses. No, so what is incredible is that the Japanese migration is very present, and so I was doing the research, and then my characters started to appear, and I think that's where you want to go with the characters a little bit.
Yeah, like there is a clear line between the trees that are brought to Mexico from Brazil because they wanted to plant the cherries like in Washington D.C. But then they realized the cherries wouldn't blossom in Mexico.
No, they wouldn't blossom, and they still wanted a tree. It was, I think, under the Porfiriato, which was a very long dictatorship that was in Mexico, and he wanted to embellish the city. He actually built amazing buildings in Mexico, Porfirio Diaz. And so he wanted beautiful trees, and he wanted cherry trees because Washington had beautiful trees, and so we're all a little bit jealous of what our neighbors are doing. So we wanted beautiful trees, and the gardeners that were at that time Japanese, they said no way, we cannot plant cherry trees because the weather is different. And so they brought jacaranda trees. The reason that my novel takes place in 70 years, more or less, is because it takes about 70 years for a tree to become mature and to bloom and to be, as beautiful as it can be. And this is the 70 years of history of Mexico and also world history. So it's the story of the Mexican Revolution. The Japanese arrived almost at the beginning of the Mexican Revolution, which is a very difficult time for Mexico. And then we have the Cristero War, which is a religious war. But also in Europe, we have First World War, and then all the pandemics that happened after the war, and then Second World War.
Yeah, I will say, I don't know if you agree, but I will say that it's like there is an aspect of magical, I wouldn't say magical realism, but it's fantastic. We have talked before this. In Seda Araña, one of your characters almost becomes a spider, at least metaphorically.
Yes.
Here, it's like your characters become flowers. They
Yes.
become the color. Is it a way to escape or to live in otherwise the trauma of immigration, the trauma of so many wars?
Yes, the characters, as soon as the Japanese immigrants arrive in Mexico, they feel, or at least they strongly feel, that they become blue in color, like the trees. And the idea, me, myself, as a migrant, sometimes I feel this, I'm a different color, I don't belong. And it's a feeling, I think, that will never go. And not only that, but now I travel to Mexico and I have the same feeling. Now it's, where am I from? And that's the thing that I find is very important, and in my characters as well. There comes a point where they feel that they are from everywhere, but it's like the plants, like the jacaranda trees, of course.
And then there is another question which I'm very curious to know. Is there a link between the way you write and the origami and the Japanese graphic art?
Yes, I was told that it's actually, the chapters sound like haikus. So even though a haiku tends to be very short, in this case, the haiku is a novel, the whole novel. So I do absolutely love haiku. I do absolutely love Asian art, Japanese art in particular. And yes, I did try to do it, but I have to confess that one of the parts of the novel that really attracts me as well is the French part, which is very different. When you read the novel, I think you can go through the different moods, because our cultures also have these artistic moods and flavors. We are, in fact, that flavor and those colors and those ways of expressing each other.
Now that you're mentioning it, we've seen the novel. There's lightness in the flowers and the trees in Mexico, brought by the Japanese, planted by the Japanese, but there is a lot of weight in France by the postman that steals letter, and his house is crumbling, is falling apart, and becomes a palace. The weight of history, the weight of memories. What would be?
Yes, well, I have to, again, I have to give a little bit of explanation. When I was writing about the postman is the initial part of the story. This is where the novel actually was born. I read an article about the Second World War, and it was a postman who was stealing letters. And he loved stealing letters. And I was like, this is awesome. This guy is so amazing. And he was stealing letters. And I'm like, why would he steal letters? But it makes sense. We steal letters because these are stories. And we want to hear stories of everyone else. You know, we want to know what's going on. It's not only gossip, it's filling up our existential need of hearing other people speak and hearing other people share their stories. So he was stealing so many letters that his apartment started, was going to fall. That's tons and tons of letters. And so I thought that's a novel. In this book, well, continuing with the postman, I spoke with an architect in Montreal. She's Louise Pelletier, and I was telling her about the postman, and I was telling her I want to write about this. And she said, well, the most famous postman in the world is Le Facteur Cheval from France. And Le Facteur Cheval lost his children when they were very young, and he must have had a terrible, terrible pain, an existential pain. And so he didn't steal letters, but he started building a palace, Le Palais Idéal in France, which I've never been to, but you can look at it on the internet. It's amazing. It's a very surreal, crazy place. And I thought that has to be in the novel. So my postman steals, but also he puts the letters away in a palace, which starts growing on its own. And that's what Ángel is referring to with magical realism. I would call it surrealism. More than realism, magical realism. I think I really like surrealism. And this maybe comes from my upbringing. I studied in a French lycée in Mexico. So again, the mix of cultures, and I learned to read in Spanish and to read in English with French teachers in Mexico, which is completely, but that's our world, actually.
So your personal love of the world, you consider yourself a citizen of the world, and you've been in Japan, you've been in many places. So what inspired you to talk about, the Jacarandans and the Japanese community?
Well, I think it's something that started coming on its own. I did start doing a lot of research, and the research took me to more and more stories. What happens in this story, I won't tell you the end, if not you won't buy the book, but I will. What happens is that this young man who travels to Mexico by boat starts writing back to his mother who stayed in Japan. And the letters are stolen by this postman in France. And he keeps all the letters, and that's mainly the story. And then 70 years go by, and you know about the story of Mexico, and you know about the story in the rest of the world. But what inspired me and what made me write about these characters, and they were really hard to write about because I'm not Japanese, and I'm not a young guy who was, traveled to Mexico at the beginning of the century, last century. So I had to do all this research to make them be alive. So people have asked me, are they based on true characters or people that actually lived? And I would say, well, they are actually real characters as long as you read them. That's when they actually become real. But there is a lot of research, and I think Kyoto is one of the cities in the world which has inspired me most of all the cities I've been to.
Is there also
so
an inspiration
magic.
about the aesthetics in Japan, the philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy in your writing?
The thing is, Kyoto is a poem. The whole city is a poem. And And I'm so impressed. It's you know, when you travel, you realize that we are all so incredibly, we're also, you know, we're all the same in the fact that we're all so incredibly different. But at the same time, you travel to Kyoto and the city is a poem. You go back to Mexico and we have cities that are poems as well. And they touch you in a very deep sense. So I think that happened to me with Japan. It has happened to me with other countries, with other cities, but it did happen with Kyoto. And I think it just came out naturally. When I heard that the jacarandas in Mexico had come from Japan, it just made sense. You know, they're so beautiful. It's an accent in our city. They're blooming right now, by the way, if you want to go and travel, and they're beautiful.
One last question, because you wanna open up the mic. You're writing this book and all your books in Canada. You're a migrant yourself, and you're writing about migrants. What is the link between what you're writing about the Japanese migrants in Mexico, your own relationship with Canada as a migrant? Is there a reflection? Is there a mirror? What is the link on all this?
No, completely. I think migration is such a powerful experience. It changes you completely. You're a migrant as well, and I know you can understand what I'm saying, and maybe many of the people here present. The fact that you have to leave everything behind and you have to rebuild yourself completely, and that's why the tree jacaranda is so important as a metaphor of who we are, because these trees arrived as little bitty seeds or little seedlings into Mexico, and most of them died. You know, most of them didn't make it. But those that did make it, they started having roots in different land with different conditions. And slowly they had branches and they had leaves and they had flowers. And these flowers, for me, are the most important part of the book, because eventually we become these flowers and we become part of this world that wasn't ours in the beginning. And I think this is just so important. And nowadays that we're unbelievably having these discussions again, as if though we hadn't understood anything, they become even more important. So the importance of our trees traveling and having roots and flowering, but of course, I mean, that's who we are as humans. I mean, way beyond being Japanese or Mexican or French or whatever. It's so important that we have this conversation. And I'm a coward, I have to say this. So I write novels. I do not stand up in front of a public like all of you do. For me, it's writing and doing poetry. You say no, but it's
Well, I have to say, she's not a coward.
I am.
Antolina, she planted thousands of trees in Mexico,
Oh,
in Veracruz, in the
yes.
south. Why? To give life.
Mhm.
She is an ecologist, not because she goes in the street to protest, but because she actually does it by herself, by doing it, by planting trees and giving life in Veracruz. Just Salgado, the photographer Brazilian, but she did the same in Mexico. Now she's here, but instead of planting trees in Mexico, she's planting trees with books, writing about flowers, writing about spider webs. And I think it's a way to give hope and to make sure we live in a better world. Thank you, Antolina.
No, thank you, Ángel. And I want to tell you something. I did plant the trees, and it's one of the reasons this book is very important for me. I did plant 11,000 trees in Mexico, in Bosque de Niebla, in a mist forest in Veracruz. I bought with my ex-partner, we bought a land and we planted these trees, and it was extraordinary to see how the landscape changed. It was unbelievable to see how the poisonous plants receded and the poisonous animals disappeared on their own without us using any poison at all to control them, and how other animals started coming and living in our land. And it was such a beautiful experience of hope and just realizing what we are, you know, part of this nature. That sometimes we speak of nature as being something apart from us, but we are this thing. We are this nature. And so this book, when the gardeners are planting the jacarandas in Mexico, it came from my heart, from this experience. You're right, and I'm glad you remembered to say
No,
that.
and I think our hope right now with the spring, the tulips in Ottawa, I think is very similar
Oh,
story.
yeah.
We will have jacaranda, we have the tulips very soon in May. So that's our
Yes,
hope with the
exactly.
geese coming from spring.
So I don't know if there are any questions from the public. I do want to thank enormously
I think we have
Ingrid
the,
and company for
Well,
doing this.
I am sure that this interesting conversation has awakened many comments and questions by the audience. But before we open this floor for comments, we have prepared a surprise to all of you. This is a video recorded in Mexico City with Sergio Hernández Galindo, the researcher at the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico, and Yasuaki Yamashita, the survivor of the Nagasaki bombing living in Mexico. So I hope you like it.
We would like to thank the embassies of Mexico and Japan in Canada for inviting us to discuss Antolina's novel Azul Humo. My name is Sergio Hernández, and I have the pleasure to be one of the commentators of the novel in the book presentation in Mexico City. I'm a historian with over 20 years of experience in Japanese immigration in Mexico. Many of the characters in Antolina's novel are familiar to me, especially Tatsugoro Matsumoto. Matsumoto was one of the first Japanese immigrants to arrive in Mexico, just 1 year before the first large-scale immigration of Japanese pioneers to Chiapas in 1897. As I said during the book presentation in Mexico, thanks to the many Japanese immigrants in Mexico, Azul Humo embodies the spirit of both Mexico and Japan and their witnessed histories and strong ties due to immigration. Matsumoto was more of a landscape architect than a gardener, having graduated as an uekishi in Japan. Thanks to his hard work and the beauty of his gardens, Tatsugoro Matsumoto caught the attention of Mexico's President Porfirio Diaz, 1876 to 1911, who placed Matsumoto in charge of all floral arrangements at the presidential residence inside Chapultepec Castle, as well as the forest surrounding the majestic edifice. In 1912, the mayor of Tokyo, Yukio Ozaki, gifted the United States with almost 3,000 cherry trees, which were planted throughout the U.S. capital. In the years that followed, Washington, D.C. became covered in millions of cherry blossoms, coloring the city's landscape every year in early spring. There was also an effort to plant thousands of cherry trees in Mexico City. However, Matsumoto explained to both governments that cherry trees may not bloom there. Following Matsumoto's recommendation, the idea was discarded. Instead, Matsumoto recommended to the president to plant jacaranda trees along the city's main avenues. This advice was both correct and visionary. Today, Mexico City enjoys our Hanami flower viewing festival with the jacarandas that magically appear every March and April, reminding us that Matsumoto's legacy continues. Antolina describes in her novel the persecution of Japanese immigrants in Mexico. I would like to highlight that during the Second World War, Mexico and Canada concentrated all Japanese immigrants and their descendants, accusing them of being foreign enemies. Even though some of them have already become Mexican and citizens. Antolina also narrates the end of the war. She describes the atomic bomb of Hiroshima as a son of uranium, and in the case of Nagasaki, as a son of plutonium. Yamashita is a hibakusha from Nagasaki. At the age of 85 years old, he is very active in Mexico and the US, visiting schools to share about his life as a survivor of the atomic bomb. He is part of the Japanese immigrants who arrived in Mexico after the war.
I, Yasuaki Yamashita, atomic bomb survivor in Nagasaki, suffered by discrimination. So I decided to move to Mexico in 1968. There, I received from Mexican warm welcome, great friendship, and love. There was no hate. I believe that people try to migrate to another country is not a troublemaker, but they try to integrate and enrich our culture and tradition. I'm very happy to be a part of Mexico. That means my life has been rich in experience. In 1995, the first time I shared my testimony after 50 years kept in secret, I am an atomic bomb survivor. Since then, I have been working for nuclear disarmament and for the peace of the world. Hate is not any solution, but the peace and love to live without the threat of nuclear weapons. Thank you. God bless all of you.
Okay, now I would like to welcome the audience to make comments or questions to the author. We have one microphone here and another in the back. Who would like to make a comment?
My name is Divine Priya. It's a pleasure to hear how you wrote it and the journey. And I'm your biggest fan. You love nature. You're all about we're all one. My one question to you is, when somebody is trying to read this beautiful novel, what music and food should they have beside them to make them feel what you're making them feel? Because as you're writing it, you must have had music, food beside you to inspire you. So so give us some suggestions.
Well, actually, when I was writing and when I write, and my kids can testify to that, there has to be absolute silence in the house. So they're not very happy with that. Now I have these amazing earphones that block all the sound around me. I don't use music to write. I use silence, which is a kind of music for me. And food, well, I don't know most writers, but I get very nervous when I'm in a creative mood, so I start eating a lot, which is not that good either. So I'm glad the novel's finished. Now I can exercise. That's a good question, but from a creative standpoint. Thank you. Yes.
Hello. I gave your daughter, I think, a copy of Carmen Aguirre's Something Fierce. She's a Canadian, but it's an autobiography of her journey. Her parents, I guess you could say, immigrated from Chile to Guatemala and then finally to Canada. Have you heard of that author, Carmen Aguirre, a young woman, well, she's about 50.
Carmen Aguirre.
Carmen Aguirre.
Ah, ok.
But it's in English.
Es del oeste de Canadá, de British Columbia.
I have not read her, but Ángel is much more knowledgeable than I am of Spanish literature in Canada.
Well, in a bit left, I mean, like her journey was certainly against many authorities getting through. So a kind of a leftist,
No tiene nada que ver con.
Okay. Thank you very much for the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arigato. Muchas gracias.
Arigato.
Arigato. For both of you, that was a very wonderful presentation. My question actually is very related to that. I know you said you eat a lot during writing a novel, but do you also read other novels or other authors? Because this actually kind of reminds me a bit of Kafka as well. And another, I know you were inspired by Asian novels or poetry like haiku. But do you have other author inspirations?
Yes, no, this is one of the questions I fear the most always, and it always comes back. I do read a lot all the time. I'm reading all the time. For this book, I don't really remember which was the specific inspiration for it, but Kafka definitely is in my list of 5,000 books that I admire.
This is also, there's sort of like a similarity with, well, yours is flowers, fauna, but for Kafka, it's animals.
Yes.
Why that there's that kind of connection?
Yes, I think that the five senses are very important in my books, and all of them, as Ángel was mentioning. I also like books. I really like Albert Camus. He's one of my main authors that I always go back to. The reason I like him a lot is because he's so honest about so many things, and this honesty I think is so important. So I also am a meditator. I do a lot of Vipassana meditation, and one of the things that my meditation teacher would say is that things have to be, straightforward, and they have to be clear from the beginning. You should not go around. And so this is one of the things I try to do. So Ángel mentioned Juan Rulfo, which is another of these authors that I absolutely adore and admire. And Juan Rulfo would say in Spanish, conciso, preciso y macizo, which means that you have to be very, very clear, and you have to choose your vocabulary very clearly. So what I tried to do, and this book was maybe 200 pages longer before I started removing. It's a little bit like a sculpture. You have the beautiful piece of marble, and then you have to start removing parts until you have the actual sculpture. So I write a lot with an eraser. I remove words and remove all the hay. And there's something really interesting that happened to me recently, and with an eraser. I remove words and remove all the hay. And there's something really interesting that happened to me recently, and my kids and Alice, who's with us, will know about this. I was helping clean up a barn that was full of hay. And it was a very similar experience to my writing, because you have to remove all the hay, all the words that are extra, so that you can finally have a novel that is so meaningful that when someone else reads it, the words will go directly to their brain and feelings. And so that's my intention with words. Yes, a wonderful question. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
My question is, why Japan? Do you know somebody from Japan, or did you read a newspaper article that got you started, or did you go to Kyoto before, or what inspired you initially to take that track?
Well, I mean, the answer is very, very simple. Japan is an extraordinary country, and I've been 3 times, I believe, in Japan, 2 times in Kyoto. Kyoto is, I want to go to Kyoto to write, it's that amazing. It's one of these cities that it's all inspiring. I find the same experience in Mexico. I go to Mexico and I come back inspired. It's one of these places that inspire you enormously. The reason I did write about Japan in this novel is because of Sergio Hernández Galindo, whom you just heard on the tape. He did a lot of investigation of the Nikkei that arrived in Mexico. And their stories are outstanding. So when they arrived during the Mexican Revolution in Mexico, they immediately got very high posts in the Revolution of Mexico. They were working with the revolutionary people because they could read and write, which was very rare in Mexico. Most people could not read and write in Mexico. So the Japanese migrants had this advantage, and they immediately got into these important posts. So I thought this was very interesting. Also, during the Second World War, it was very shocking to me, and I'm sorry about my ignorance, but I didn't know that we had concentration camps for Japanese. And when I started reading about it, that has to be in the novel. These are things we have to know about. And it's just 2 generations back, and we cannot forget these things. We have to talk about them, and we have to realize what can happen if we do not have dialogue. So the more I read, I think the more I became interested in researching more and writing about the stories. And I think Sergio Hernández, he's an amazing investigator, historian, sorry, and he speaks fluent Japanese, so he has been able to approach the Nikkei in Mexico. I hope this is how you pronounce it, but he has been able to approach them and get their stories, and he has written so many articles that recently now we have access to this part of our history as Mexicans. Yes.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to reading your book, and I was very attracted to reading your book, and I was very attracted to the idea behind your book, because I'm very interested in Japanese migration, and I hope that what your book reveals will be something that furthers my interest. I had the pleasure of living in Japan as well as living in Mexico.
Wow.
And I understand what you're talking about, the special connections the two countries have. But when I lived in Mexico, it's been already 40 years, I was shocked to discover there were 35,000 Japanese living in Mexico City. I mean, what that meant for me is the best sushi I could imagine every single day at a different restaurant every day. But I also discovered that there was a wonderful Owen festival in Mexico City that I was able to attend. And I befriended so many Japanese in Mexico, it almost felt like I was in Japan. As a matter of fact, one of the first things I did is I found a tutor who I had hired to tutor me in Japanese while I was living in Mexico.
Wow.
But it was a wonderful experience for me, and I've always been fascinated by the process of migration from Japan to Mexico, and I'm looking forward to reading the book very much.
It's incredible how the first Japanese migrants arrived in Mexico they came with great poverty, you know, and for Mexicans, it's hard to imagine this because we always think of Japan as being a wealthier country than Mexico, you know, that's our image of Japan. And when you start reading how they arrived, they started working in the mines, you know, the different mines in Mexico, and many of them lived in slavery. And so these stories are the ones that I think we have to, you know, to pick and tell again. So my novel is not historical. I'm not a historian. I'm a novelist, and it's fiction, but it is based on a lot of research. And yes, your story is amazing. That's another novel.
All right, hi. I'm actually looking forward to read your book as well. Like
Thank
I
you.
saw all of them. I'm like, I have a hard time to choose. So, can you give me a highlight? Which book should I start first if I buy them all? And what is your most favorite like novel that you made?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another hard question. Can you help me, Ángel? Because I have a lot of preferences. You know, this one, I'm just going to talk about this one, and then Ángel can answer. This is the first novel I published, and it's based on an author that I greatly admire. She's from Catalunya in Spain. She's Mercè Rodoreda, and this novel has a lot to do with her. And I find it's very beautiful. It speaks of a woman in a very traditional way, and so it's very different from the others. It's not maybe as poetic, but I do have a kind of a love for that novel, but the others are very different. So maybe Ángel can answer.
Well, it's a tough question, but I'm just gonna. We haven't been talking about this novel. It's called Las Torres de Arena. And what is amazing, this is about the 111 and a woman that is trapped in one of the towers as is keeping, and everything came to her mind, which is linked to her divorce. So it's fascinating novel. That said, she just expressed about Tres Silencios. So I would be more personal, as I would say in French, a coup d'état. I will go for this one.
I knew he was
Say
going
that,
to
Anya.
say that.
I don't know. I have a wait for this one because With this book, Antolina reminds me of, and I have to be very brief because I know we have to cut this. In the 20th century, a great writer, Italo Calvino, wrote a book called The Future for Literature and the New Millennium. And this, he wrote it before our century, and he kind of a prophet and say, what is going to be the novel of the century? Well, the novel of the century has to be very deep into you, straightforward. You go to the main subject fast. You have to show what is behind, and you have to be very light, because the history of the world is very heavy, we're saying in the context right now. So you make it light, and at the same time, you have to use your imagination to change that. Well, Antolina resumes all that in this book and all the other books. So I think it's a good example of what we can do in our literature, in our modern world, to respond to our actual situation of literature in the world.
Yeah, thank you. I knew he was going to say that. But I think it's a good book. I kind of agree with you. Yeah, I like it very much. I have my next novel is coming out in July, and I'm so excited. It's with Editorial Planeta, which is one of the big publishing houses in Mexico, and they do have a contract with the US. I'm not sure about Canada. I have to check with them. But the novel will be presented in the New York Book Fair, which I'm very excited about. That's the forthcoming news. So we'll do that later. Yeah. Any last questions?
I have
yes.
one. Which language was written originally? And if it was Spanish, it's available in English now?
Oh, that's all of my novels were written. Every single one of them was written in Spanish in Canada. And so I think I feel very proud about this. I also feel that it's a big problem because no one can read them. So now I have to translate them. I only translated the first 20 pages so that we could have you here present and everyone could understand those first pages. But the next step is doing the translations. Yes.
I just jump in because just to help and respond. Antolina is not saying, but I think it's important to say, her mother is from the United States.
Yes.
So I find in her writing a lot of the style of the English writing. So there is some kind of a translation of that into Spanish. So when it's going to be translated into English, it's almost like going back to the source. That's my point of view.
My mother was from San Francisco. She moved to Mexico when she was very young, in her 20s, early 20s. She met my dad and never went back. So that's the charm of Mexico. No? You have these things happen. And I did grow up in Mexico. I always spoke in Spanish with my mother. She had a terrible accent, but she never wanted to speak in English with us. And that's funny. So yes, I'm a migrant even from before I was born, because my mother came to Mexico, and then now I migrated to Canada. I migrated back to Mexico with my children. I wanted them to know their roots, and now we've come back. Story of my life. Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic exchange of thoughts and feelings, and now I would like big applause for Antolina.
Gracias, Ingrid.